Start streaming. Check, check, check 1, 2. Audio looks good. Video looks good. I think we got it. Before we jump into the coding stuff, I'm just looking at this market here today. I didn't place any trades today. I placed an attempted order for a long in NVIDIA, but didn't get filled. And one of the things that I really want to bring attention to, that's really important for my discretionary trading, is the pre-market levels for both the individual stock and also the ES or the overall market. Doesn't matter really what overall instrument you look at, but I use the ES just to keep an eye on the levels. But we haven't broken out. It's what, 10:30? We haven't left pre-market levels. So the market's just trapped. The overall ES is just trapped between its pre-market levels. Um, Not really lending favor for trend continuation type setups, which is what my intraday discretionary system is for. We did have a couple that ran. My algo caught a couple. I put on a couple of trades and they ended up going, but um, from the by hand manually standpoint, I was waiting for something to break out or break down from this range. That never happened. The one that where was it? Baba was going. I did not think that this would find highs again. I was surprised to see that this found highs again. Nice big breakout on the daily for Baba. So keep looking at that. Next week, probably. Someone mentioned there was news out of China. The other one was NVIDIA. It was on this move here. I was looking for a continuation. This is probably the wrong time frame to watch. Maybe a 5 minute, yeah. So I was here bidding down here, down in these 26s, and we just never retraced back down there. So I never got the long. It ended, actually, I think it was even earlier in the day. It was like a 3 minute, yeah. It was here. I was bidding down here looking for this to come back down into this area to get the long. That never happened, and I went and revisited highs, which is completely fine. I'm happy to not have put any trades on this morning. Just the market's not breaking out of its pre-market range. And then this number here is actually a reference from another chart that I have, just a daily chart, and this just says that the ES is currently doing 52% of its average range. So very contracted day. Anyways, Baba made new highs. I'll set a 90 high day on that. Up 7%. This thing is looking pretty juicy on the daily here. So maybe something will set up later. Anyways, done with that. Done with that. Let's open up this. Let's call this coding stream. And let's do this thing. Okay. Hi, Neo. Hi, Ahmed. Hope you guys are well. Neo posts a question up here. Let me actually grab a screenshot of it just because that'll be easier. So we got a question here, and it's basically I want to draw an extension for swing high-low, extend until further intersection, but using custom logic instead of the zigzag study. Also to get an alert what these levels are hit. It'd be bonus nice to be able to, okay, so you got a couple things going on. Can you pick one question here and concisely write out what the actual question is, and then we'll cover that and then go from there. Which of these, you got a couple different things here. Which one of these do you want to cover, Neo? Ahmed, I see you posted some code. I'll download that while we're waiting. Here's a meds code. Gonna just get rid of these white spaces here. An alert once an extension is hit. Now, isn't there an existing, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe somebody who knows Sierra even better, isn't there an existing thing for when, uh, uh, an existing study for when price crosses an extended trend line? Isn't there already something like that? Let me ask the Sierra chart wizards. Isn't there already an existing study for when price crosses an extended line for an alert to fire? Just an alert once the extension is hit. How is that different than? Oh, that I misread. Okay, I see what you're saying. I think there is a built-in one. I think there is a built-in one for that specific reason. I don't remember what the name of it is, though. We would have to. Let's take a look. Let's take a look. Studies. Something about alerts, maybe. Alert. Or is it extend value until future intersection? Some of these you can add alerts once you put them on. Like you can put an alert condition here. I am pretty sure this is doable. I didn't want to actually add that. I'm pretty sure this is doable with a built-in um, thing. Piotr should be able to tell us. He's typing now. That's right. Nice. Thank you. Reversion. Yes, you had that, and I had it open all week long. This this image. Let me copy this image as well. Put it down here. And the question was to oh, okay. So Piotr says in response to the question above from Neo, he says that you can accomplish this. Place a line, right click on it, and then set an alert. So no custom code needed for that situation. That's what you've been doing? So what about that isn't working? You have different time frames? Okay, while you're typing, Reversion wanted to walk through. Let me take a screenshot of this. Regarding automated trading. This will be a good one to cover. Would like to have to move the lines for each time there's a new level. I'm not really sure I'm following you, Neo. I would have to move the lines for each time there's a new level. Can you try restating what the exact question is in a really concise manner? And then we'll go from there. Right now, let's take a look into this. I'm going to actually make this a little bit larger so that it's easier to see on the recording, and then we'll just move around it and zoom out. So Reversion has um, an automated system that he has designed, and there was a question about precedence, and Here's a diagram. So before we actually go through talking about precedence and reversion, if you have a microphone, now would be a good time to jump on. But before we do that, let's just walk through this diagram for everybody who is not familiar with what they have going on here. So let's just walk through this from the beginning so that we're all on the same page. Over on this side, it looks like there are some kind of conditions for
Yeah,
what the signal is. Oh, hey, you got a mic. Hey,
I did. Yeah, yeah.
hey, how's it going?
Great.
So you got some, it looks like basically a signal generator on this side. You have a trigger,
Yeah.
and blackouts is this essentially like kill conditions?
Yeah, those are like filtered dates, like FOMC day or something like that, right?
Gotcha. So FOMC for an example, and basically what this means is don't trade on
Yeah,
those blackouts. It's a
exactly.
blackout or kill condition. Great. So those are another set of conditions contained in here. And then here are directional or seasonal filters. What does this mean?
Yeah, so like stuff like how bonds go up at the end of the month and come back down at the beginning of the month. So just like if there's a period where something has a seasonal effect, that's the place I plug it in.
Hmm. Let's beat that up a little bit more. I'm curious how you're calculating that and then how you're using or applying that.
Sure. So,
And also the
I,
directional piece. What does the directional piece mean or imply?
well, Well, it just means like I guess in my mind I was thinking at some point like if I wanted to plug in higher time frame directional filtering or something like that, I might go there. Right now it just reads in a CSV that has for whatever market I'm trading, it has like only trade on this side on these dates. So to use the bonds example again, on the last 5 trading days of the month, only take long signals on UB, and the first 5 trading days of the month only take shorts on UB. So
And
stuff like that.
is this really just an extension of the kill conditions in a sense?
Kind of, yeah,
Because if you're only taking or if this is reducing the number of trades, then it's really just an extent. This is kind of part of this in a way, right? It's
yeah,
reasons you would be trading less. It would be
yeah.
reasons to not initiate a position. Okay, so this is kind of like one. I'm gonna pretend this is one box here.
Great.
Okay, so you have this in a container, which you have labeled as standard precedence. And what does this mean to you, standard precedence?
Well, so when I was trying to debug it, I was going through Sierra and looking at that, and so you can set they give you three levels that you can set the execution of the study
Hmm.
at. And so standard precedence is what it just defaults to,
Hmm.
but will be, calculated in the order from, I think, basically your ID numbers in your,
Yes.
yeah. Um, so standard precedence is like stuff that's first, gets calculated first. Then low precedence would be stuff that you want to be sure that the standard precedence stuff has calculated already, and then very low precedence is like the last of the last, I guess. And that's I think you pull these in when the automate like the way that Sierra would automatically do it is not in line with what you need.
Okay. So is it set up in that this is one study, this is a separate study, this is a separate study, this is a separate study? Like, how many studies are
Yeah.
you running at one time?
Well, so this is like kind of the other part of my question is like, what is best practice in this? Because I set out to do it like this. I thought this would be good, like more modular. And it's just like debugging something like this was very, very difficult. So now it actually is in one, all in everything from conditions to the right, I guess, is in one thing now.
Yeah,
Um,
to
but
to
but I don't
touch
know,
on
like,
that. Yeah, to
yeah,
touch on that, I think that's an important thing. I would say for what you're trying to accomplish, it makes more sense to make the automated system in its entirety. So basically, the entire drawing here that you
uh-huh.
have should fit into one Sierra chart study.
Okay,
That does not mean it needs to be one C++ file. That does not mean
yeah,
it needs to be one executable. that you've compiled, you could potentially have modular design within this automated system. But yes, I would have only one single study that you're adding to your, to your chart,
Ah,
and it would just be this one study. And so the precedence would go away because it's just this one study that's going to be automated. But within here, you have all your little modules that are doing all the various concerns that you've separated. But now debugging becomes significantly easier because it's all in one.
right.
Tweaking it becomes easier. Managing the code base becomes easier actually. So I would recommend putting everything under one roof in the sense that it's all in one study.
Okay.
And then, but that again, that doesn't mean this can be a separate C++ file. This can be, you can make them objects, classes, structs, whatever you
Okay.
need for your reasoning. But yeah, I would make it a single study.
Okay. Great.
But that
That's
doesn't
really
really
cool.
change what we're discussing here. We should keep going through this. So even if we took away this precedence piece here, these could still be modules
Mhm.
inside of one system or one study. So you could have the signal, if we extrapolated this a little bit more, if I move this down, you kind of have like signal generation over here, right?
Yeah.
Actually, let's make that the signal generation. And then what do we, let's take a look at over here. So from here, you have an arrow coming over here, but then also from triggers, we have it coming over to here. So there's a couple entryways. We also have some stuff coming over to execution. So I'm identifying just a couple spots. Oops, that's one spot, that's another spot, and then that's another spot where we have some kind of connection to another module. So
Right.
let's take a look at those individual spots. So well, let's just start at the bottom here. Conditions.
Great.
How is conditions different than trigger here on the signal generation piece?
So conditions is really it's kind of handle. It could be written more clearly, and now I actually have a slightly clearer understanding of what it's supposed to do now. But it basically like it looks at the trades that it's already taken and just kind of puts in all of the basic filtering things like if it took a trade within the past 10 bars, don't take another trade, only take one trade per signal, all that kind of stuff.
So what you're describing there is, oops, is less so conditions, but more of risk management and
Huh.
position management.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
The signal generator, if you want to, separate your concerns, just concerns itself with examining market conditions to determine whether or not an entry is possible. But
Right.
if you move this signal generator over here, and if we do a left to right type of read, if the risk management or position management system says, hey, you can't put a trade on because of prior taken trades, or you hit max drawdown, or you hit this, or you hit that, signal generator won't even get the green light to put the signal on.
Right.
So maybe you worry about position management at a higher level, and then if position management and risk management is giving green lights, then you allow the signal generator to um, consume and process data. And
Yeah,
if
that makes a lot of sense.
and then for the reasons that risk management or position management, now it wouldn't be risk management wouldn't be concerned with necessarily things that block it out here. It could be, um, like, I guess it depends on how you, because FOMC is a risk type of situation, so I guess that's getting into lexicon and syntactical differences, but, or, arguing about how to phrase things. But um, if you have a holiday module inside your risk management system, like is today a holiday, for example,
Right.
or is today FOMC? That's part of your risk management system. Today's FOMC, no trades, signal generator doesn't get kicked off. you're done.
Right. Smart.
Likewise, if you mentioned something at the top of the call where you said if it's the end of the month, something about going long in bonds. That might be another, like end of month conditions or something, which
Right.
says if it's the end of the month, um, maybe no shorts, and then signal generator just does not take any shorts. But you see how it's feeding from this into that rather than the other way around? This makes
Yeah.
logically this makes more sense for what you're trying to accomplish, in my opinion.
Okay. Great.
There's no right way here, but there's a lot of wrongs.
Yeah.
So so yeah, um, you kind of have to work with what you're trying to accomplish and go from there. So, okay, so we have conditions here, which is really signal generator. Long okay, short okay. Okay, so that makes sense. Let's take a look at what does this mean? Prices. You have prices written right
Well,
here.
so as part of the like the same I guess math that generates the trigger also kind of sends some prices, some potential entry, exit prices and stuff over to the quote unquote entry system. Like basically entry, stop loss, and target.
Okay, okay. So in the way that I usually do this is that my entry system is part or the calculation of all those prices is actually a module inside of my signal generator.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of
Um,
what's going on now.
yeah, yeah. So um, if the signal generator is allowed to generate signals and process data, then if the conditions become such that an entry is warranted, then it does the calculation. So this is my uh, calculate prices, entry, stop, etc. Right? Your
Yeah.
targets, all that good stuff. So that's within the signal generator module, in my opinion. Okay, and another thing is that this signal generation, which does calculate the prices, this doesn't actually put the trade on at all. It's just prepping where a trade would potentially be.
Right.
Really, if you have an all green or an all green light, in other words, everything's go for putting on a trade, then the next step would be the execution piece, which would also then um, be tied into the position management because position management would need to know about this trade being put on. So if we move this out of the way here and then we say there's another thing right here called execution system, these two are actually tied together, and that's a double-sided situation right there,
Mm.
right? So let's go back up here, and then entry price in it. So this is your stop targets, all that good
Yeah.
stuff that you're prepping here. Um, these flow back. So this is your okay. So this is like what actually got executed. Great. Yeah. So in that sense, the signal generator doesn't really need to know about the execution system,
Right.
but the position manager does. Because if you execute, you need to have that being managed by the position manager. And the position manager needs to tell the signal generator, for example, if you only want one trade at a time, you don't want to be processing new entries. Like, let's say you have a rule that you can only be in one position at a time with this.
Right.
Your position manager would prevent your signal generator from processing entries if you were in a position,
Right.
which you would know from your execution module because it's talking to your position manager,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So,
No, it totally makes sense.
okay.
Yeah.
And then your signal generator can be dumb to the point of execute. It doesn't need to know about execution. It doesn't care because its job ends after it calculates the signal.
Right.
Neither does it need to be concerned about the position manager or risk because that's not its concern. It's modularized. So then we come over here. This is the execution piece of everything. You have a trade manager. This is doing updating of stops and stuff. So the way I handle this piece here, this is just a suggestion, is that the position manager, if it's in a position, it knows that it won't process entries from the signal generator, but it will process exits.
Yeah.
So if you have, oops, these, let me just put them over here. If you have these and you're in a position, then your position manager can say, hey, signal generator, process exits only.
Right.
Which would then, if an exit became conditionally truthy, you could go to execution with it if you wanted to do it like a market order. Otherwise, you would have had it already set up as a limit order. And then you wouldn't process any of the entries because you're in a position.
Right.
And again, the signal generator has no idea what's actually on or off. It doesn't care because its job is just to do the signals.
This makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense breaking out the position management that way. So in a lot of ways, the position manager is like that really directs. That's kind of the director. That becomes the director of
It's
it.
the quarterback in some ways, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Cool.
mean, there's a lot of nuances to all of
Of
this.
course. Of course.
There's a lot of nuances and there's a lot of complexity that can be added. For example, if you have multiple strategies on multiple symbols, this all needs to get abstracted another layer or two.
Yeah.
But um, yeah, this is the basic idea. And then, the rest of this stuff here, aside from strategy strats, but like if you have an external broker or something you need to execute to, then that would just be this layer talking to that layer
Right.
um, as needed. But what do you mean by strategy stats here? What does that mean?
Oh, I just have a thing that so the way it's set up is kind of to prototype stuff quickly, as well as like set it to execute. So I basically have a version that's kind of an indicator version that just calculates on all the data that's on the chart with simple, did the bar cross the limit, order price, etc. And then just spits out, profit and loss, profit factor, all that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, you can do that two different ways. You could spit out that data from here. You could spit out that data from here into some kind of like performance stats module that you could build and then feed
Yeah.
that back into your risk or position manager if needed. But yeah, I mean, you could stats engine and then I'll just extend that like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That guy's pretty straightforward.
And then feed it back into whatever system you want. But this is kind of how I see what your system is here.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Real quick question. So like right now, I've got a version, I scrapped the everything in its own study and stuck most of the stuff into one file. And right now, basically I have like a header file with, whatever, like 50, 60 functions in it. Do you think like, is that the way to do something like this? Or should I be like looking at like creating classes and objects?
So it depends on, excuse me, it depends on, hold on a second, gotta clear my throat. The coffee I drink is like worse than motor oil. It depends on what your goals are for ease of management and
Mm-hmm.
like upkeep, and then also distribution. So
Gotcha.
if this is just running on your machine and you're the only one who's going to have your hands in it, and no one else is going to be touching this thing, and you're okay with having everything stuffed into one header file for the prototypes and function declarations, then yeah, that's fine. I mean, purists will say you should separate everything out. Do what works for you.
Okay.
If you're
Cool.
able to manage it that way, then do it that way. Hold on one second. Okay. If you want to get more fancy with it, or you have other needs, or you need to have multiple people working on it. Let's say you have a team of people that's just working on the signal generator, or you have other people working just on these components, then yeah, I would modularize it. Personally, I have everything modularized. I have much different needs than you, but
Sure.
all of my, my system doesn't look like this, but all of my stuff is in its own separate class, which interfaces with the other modules that it needs to.
Okay.
But that's because I have different priorities for what I'm doing with this. If I would look at what you need to do and what you're trying to get out of it and go off of there. Don't just put it into classes just because that's what people say you should do.
Okay.
Do it if you need to keep things more organized.
Okay. Great. That's awesome. This is super useful. I really appreciate it, Frozen.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. Okay, we got a question from Chris. Let me grab a screenshot here of Chris's question. Um, okay, Chris says that he is looking for creating an iceberg detector. He's wondering what the exhaustion imbalance detector or indicator that I built with Papa Jackson and only ticks. This is I think a reference to the uh, Papa Jacks only ticks um,
Yeah, it
indicator.
is.
Hey,
I
Chris.
just want to say what you're doing here is fantastic. I've been following you for a few weeks now, and I think I've been looking at what you're doing, and I just want to thank you for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. I enjoy giving back to the community and mentorship. I think I went on a really long ramble on this on the Q&A with Fat Cat the other day, but and Zero, but I had some really awesome mentors in my time, and this feels like the right thing to do. So, Ahmed's code, I'm putting in a reminder here because I completely forgot about Ahmed's code, and I'm sorry, but we'll get back to that after Chris's question. Ahmed, my bad. Um, so, Chris, let me clear my throat one more time. Uh, is this based off of the time and sales? And iceberg detector would use pulling and stacking. So two separate questions um, for this. The exhaustion imbalance indicator is not based off of the time and sales directly because it actually reads the footprint, not the literal
Right,
time
I
and
see.
sales.
So,
So,
so on the footprint, you're looking at potentially the delta and so on.
oops, that's not a line. That's a line. So if you have, I don't know, something like that, and then actually, uh, something like that on the footprint,
Yeah.
that study is actually reading the levels, each price level on the footprint, and it's examining for exhaustion and imbalance based on the diagonal on these footprint values. So this is derived from the tape, though. I mean, this footprint
So
is
you
derived.
use, would I be right in saying you're using the VAP container there?
The VAP container, correct. Yeah, the VAP container, for those who aren't familiar, is the volume at price container, which is literally this. Yeah, a footprint is essentially a volume at price container. Here's a price. Let's pretend this price is 100. And those are the volumes on the bid and the ask at $100 or whatever instrument. It doesn't matter. You guys get the point. Most of the people watching this know what a footprint and volume at prices. That's all that the VAP is. So by opening up this structure, Sierra exposes this. We can iterate through these on a bar, and we can examine the bid side quantity, the ask side quantity, and that's exactly what this indicator is doing. It's just going through and reading, and it sees things like this situation here, and it's like, holy crap, there is way more volume on the bid side than on the ask side. So there's an imbalance here of some type if it matches the conditions that we wrote it to identify those. So that's how it's doing that.
I see.
In terms of iceberg, so this is a hotly contested and somewhat
Interesting topic.
yeah,
Is the best way of putting it.
interesting religious war type of topic. Iceberg detectors reminds me of the age-old question, which is better, the red car or the blue car? Which is to say that this is almost kind of a
Personal
silly
preference.
question. Yeah, it's what's the point? So the first thing with iceberg detectors is that there is no definitive correct answer because that information we're not privy to. We don't actually know if that was a legitimate iceberg or if that was just a random set of hidden passive orders or if that was new participants coming in with passive. We don't actually know. We have no way to prove it because we don't know who the other party is or parties are on the other side of that order. So everything that you would try to accomplish with an iceberg detector would be implicit. So right off the bat, you're starting off with well, this is our best guess. It's not definitive, which is fine. If we acknowledge that, that's fine. Yep.
One of the things I've been doing is I've been taking the time and sales, and rather than I've been kind of gridding it down to 1 second segments. I put it into an array of 1 second segments,
Mm-hmm.
and then seeing the high volume coming in,
Mm-hmm.
like within a 1 second range, on the S&P.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, we see 1,000 trades go through within a second. I'm kind of mapping that out, and what I tend to find is that that's happening at the pivots, and I was kind of thinking, well, if someone's feeding in orders, and obviously I know it's like I say it's a hotly contested topic, but if you could see the stack and seeing that and record it in a way that you could actually identify that we keep on seeing 50 orders going in, 50 orders going in, then obviously it's quite useful to know that.
Yes and no, I would say. So there's a couple things here. Yeah, the detection of icebergs is kind of a what are those things called where they attract flies or mosquitoes to them and it zaps them? What are those called? Like a moth to a light? What are they called? Like
Oh,
mosquito
I know what you mean. When you're in a kitchen, the
or
blue things.
yeah, or out on a porch or a deck or something in a buggy area. That's kind of what iceberg detectors are I think for a retail crowd. It sounds very attractive. It sounds like a holy grail, but in reality, it's even if let's take devil's advocate. Let's say there was an iceberg detector. How would you apply it? What would you do with that info? Let's say you had something that was reliable. How would you apply it?
Well, my thinking is this: is basically when you come into a level where someone's feeding in orders, if we're feeding in orders and we see a reversal in price, then we can take that as that potentially is a passive. There's more strength on the passive side. We've got a passive bid, and they want to hold it back.
Define define what did you say about price? A reversal in price. Define a reversal in price.
Define and reversal, right? So if we say, for instance, we're on a 30-second chart, and we were saying that we've got a free candle, two candle scenario, two candle, free candle scenario, two candles down and then three candles up, and then we analyze the price data within those candles to say, well, this is an anomaly, i.e., if the average volume is, say, for instance, on the S&P on a bar is say 1,000, and then we see 10,000 coming in,
I'm going to play devil's
we know.
advocate. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Then
Yeah,
what you
well,
have is
yep,
you were sitting and watching price move away from that level, and now you're up here,
yep,
wondering, well, okay, how do I get back long down here? Well, which you can't because you just missed the move by waiting for that confirmation.
yeah. No, that's true. But if you are using, say, for instance, the 30-second data chart to then feed into, say, for instance, a 3,000 volume chart, you're trading on a time frame of, say, for instance, a 3,000 volume chart, then the granular information on the 30-second chart gives you the information to work out the turns for a kind of a bigger picture. It's kind of what I'm thinking.
There might be an edge there. I would be surprised if it's exploitable. There might be an edge there. I won't say there isn't because I'm not an authority on what is or isn't an edge, and no one really is. What if it works for you, then it's an edge. If you can exploit that scenario using that multi-time frame analysis, then that's great. That's awesome. I have a feeling that would not work over time because there are very many scenarios that can result in situations that instead of this and then continuing, result in this. And without actually like tracking the stats and doing some kind of analytics on that, on the occurrences of this, as you called it, an anomaly of that
Larger data,
like
larger transactions.
iceberg anomaly, right?
Yeah.
I think I misspelled anomaly there, but if that's it, and you detect these, then I wonder what the actual frequency of continuation versus failure. I don't know. I haven't done any of that analysis, so I can't speak that it is or it isn't. Going back to what we can actually control, which is the detection of something like this. So yeah, I guess we can split it into two things. Detection is one
Yep.
component, and then application of that information is a second. This I can help you with. This
Mm-hmm.
this I cannot, because I have no
No,
idea.
that's cool. I mean, what we're doing from an analysis point of view is we're sticking it into a SQL Server database down to tick level, and then looking at looking at this from a data point of view. So to actually get the quantitative analysis to see if there is an edge. I mean, no one knows that whether or not you've got an edge, or whether or not that edge will last. But
Right.
it's something that we are doing from a quant's point of view.
Nothing good
But
lasts.
no, this is it. And what one of my mentors actually said, Timothy Marge, and he was an oil trader. He always used to say, "Context is king," and with
True.
any sort of bot. Timothy Marge, he's now passed away now, but he was a really successful oil trader.
Mm.
And he always used to say, because I'm one of these that do believe in code and believe in bots and stuff like that. He always used to say, a bot will work for 2 weeks, Chris, and then after that you'll have to recode it.
Mm.
So, and I'm like, well, I'm looking for that magical bot that does work for longer than 2 weeks.
Yeah, there is no holy grail. Sorry to spoil Christmas, but there is no holy grail. The reality is that markets go through regime changes, context changes, and larger cycles, and certain approaches work better in some, work less better in others, and then don't work at all in yet another, group of market regimes. And that's part of what makes everything so tricky, is that there is no repeatable pattern for this industry, for this passion that we've chosen to pursue. There is no right answer, and there's no repeatable strategy to extract money. You have to be constantly vigilant and aware of the changes that are happening and adjust accordingly. So I guess there is some truth in what your friend said, but also it's not it doesn't necessarily have to be that black and white. There are ways to get around some of that. Um, but that's we'd have to go into like deep context of what actually we're trying to accomplish. Going back to the iceberg thing, regarding how to actually do the detection of it, because the application I think is even more hairy, like how you choose what you have here to apply. I think there's situations, like let's take away some of this noise. I think there are certain situations here that you could apply this both as a long or as a short, even if there's an iceberg here. Like
Hmm.
it depends on the context. This having had a large amount of either hidden or executed without having been uh, uh, advertised size on the book, that having happened, that anomaly having happened there, doesn't necessarily mean that the direction of the symbol of the security is upward.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean that it also could mean it could be upward until a certain point of time and then no longer. And that point of time could be here, it could be here, it could be here. There's a lot of different options. Likewise, this doesn't necessarily mean up. Um, what do I mean by that? Well, if there is a huge shorten, and that this comes to, let's say this is a major level, right?
yeah.
Um, and all of a sudden there's someone down here just gulping it up and just, you know, that like there's nothing advertised on the book and there's just tons of volume being absorbed down here.
I passive bid.
Right, a passive bid, a hidden bid, something like that. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a pivot point. That could just be a massive short covering part of their position.
I see. Yep, yep.
That like so again, the application I can't even speak to. I don't think anybody has a consistently correct way of applying this type of information. And not to even mention the difficulty with detection of it, but the detection is easier than the application, I think, because there are times when, let's say on the equity side, which I don't think you're trading, but I'll see an active seller and they're selling, 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 and then all of a sudden we'll come into a major level, and then we got this guy sitting here and he is just, or gal sitting here, and they're just consuming and absorbing all this volume, and sure, we get a tiny little blip and then the selling resumes. So I contest. I am the devil's advocate for the application and meaning, like the overall bias and direction determination that one would get from an iceberg anomaly event. Um,
I think it's really good to discuss this with someone that has got a contrarian point of view, because I think when you start chatting to people, obviously like yourself, it helps from a point of view rather than me having a bias saying I'm biased and I'm thinking if we get this situation we're just going to go up.
mhm.
It's good that you're highlighting that it's not necessarily what might happen.
Yeah, I mean, let's just there's a couple people in here, 10 something folks in here. What do you guys think when you have, let's say you spot with your eyeballs on the DOM or on the tape, whatever instrument you're trading, and you spot what is considered to be an unusual amount of passive bids down here. You don't know what's going to happen here. You don't know if it's going to go up or down. What do you guys think? Type in the chat here. What do you think this means? What does this mean? Does this mean that it's a pivot point and it's going to go up for days, weeks, years, hours, minutes, seconds? Is it just um, somebody who is just covering part of their short and then it's going to proceed down? How do you interpret something like this? I think that's such a difficult thing to build edge off of, at least for my constitution, for myself. I would have a very difficult time building edge off of this. The other thing, maybe I have a negative bias on this because pieces of software like Bookmap and um, some others, and I'm not trying to trash on them, but they sell an iceberg indicator as like an add-on to their
Yeah,
software,
I've seen.
and it's a big like I was saying, it's a big mosquito light or mosquito killer light. It's just zapping retail customers paying for this thing that like how do you apply it? How do you apply it? I don't know. Maybe someone smarter than me can answer. I don't know how to extract edge out of this personally. So I guess if someone's watching this on YouTube later and you know how to extract edge out of that, how about you post in the comments about how you do it? Um, but we got a couple more comments here. Ziggy says, let me just screenshot them because it's helpful after the fact. Ziggy is saying it's tricky because the accuracy will never be there, and then you'll get a bunch of false positives. So that's kind of like what this is. That what you're referring to with this, Ziggy? Is that it's kind of a false positive in the sense that you think that this could potentially be a pivot and then it could go down, or is that extracting some kind of meaning out of this, or what do you mean by that? Closest I've come to studies working with max depth at a price level plus volume at price on a very granular time frame, so super low time frame like you were saying, Chris. There should be more volume at the price than the depth is advertising, which makes sense, right? That's hence the iceberg. Um, the disclosed quantity will be less than the orders quantity. Um, okay, so that's that. Thank you, Chris, for that question. Now, Ahmed.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, man. Sorry again, Ahmed, about missing you. I have you here, pulled up here. So Ahmed, you sent this code. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for the folks at home. Ahmed, what are we doing with this code? What are we looking at here? While you type that out, what your question is, because I don't think you had a question. You just said the code, right?
Hi.
Hey, hey, you got a mic. Hey.
Yeah.
Um, so how's it going, first of all?
Okay.
And what's your question on this piece of code that you have here?
I'm using volume by.
Mm-hmm.
So this study is changing the volume by bar depend on the volume in this symbol.
Say that last part again. Your mic was breaking up a little bit. Something about the volume by bar for a certain symbol.
Dynamically. Like
Dynamic.
if if it's AMD like 15 million share in today, it will be different than Shopify.
Oh man, your mic is breaking up pretty bad. Maybe try to type out your question because
Okay,
it
okay.
sounds like you're underwater or something. So while you type out your question, I'm just gonna walk through this code line by line. I'm not familiar with this code, so I'm gonna just walk through it while you type out your question and everybody can follow along. So at the top we have our Seer chart header file, which we need. We have our DLL name. We have our actual hook call that Seer will be calling on incoming ticks. Looks like there's an input that was specified called a ratio. Here we have some defaults set, pretty standard stuff. This appears to be time since open, cumulative volume, and then we're looping through the entire every single bar on the chart, and we are looking at the date and time of that bar, and we are grabbing the time in seconds and the previous bar's time in seconds, and we are detecting the time period of the bar. So this is for non-time based bars then, right? This is for Ahmed wrote, it's changing the volume by bar depending on the volume of the symbol, but depending on the daily volume of the symbol. Okay, so what is the bar period that you have your chart set up that you're running this on, Ahmed? So yeah, it's detecting the bar period in time based on uh, based on whatever non bar period time that the chart is set up on. So, for example, if you had 5-minute bars, just so people are following along, because it might be confusing. Let's say you have 5-minute bars, right? Let's say this example is 5-minute bars. And let's say this is 10 a.m. Well, what is this? Well, this is going to be 10:05 a.m., right? That's with 5-minute bars. Now let's say you have what Ahmed is saying, and he's using a volume-based bar. The volume on this bar at 10 a.m. might be higher than the volume on this bar later on. And so this might be 10 a.m., but this one might be 12:13 p.m., depending on how long it takes to fill out the volume required. So the calculation that he's doing here, and actually let me just put it off to the side here so it's easier to see. The calculation that he's doing here is he's just saying, hey, take the time of this bar and then subtract the time of this bar, and then you have you know how long it was in between them. So, so that's what that's doing. And then time since open, it's just calculating that. But you could grab this from a different way. You don't need to calculate it this way, but um, you can achieve this time since open in a different way. And then you go into another loop, also going through each bar, and you are adding the volume of the current bar to the cumulative bar, to the cumulative volume. Now, one thing I see, Ahmed, that you could reduce your processing time, since this cumulative volume variable is set to 0 and you're already going through each element or each bar in the chart, you could just take this out of here and move it in here. You could just put it down here and get rid of this, and you'd achieve the exact same thing. So you wouldn't have to then, because right now you're going through each bar in the chart, and then you're going through each bar in the chart one more time, and it's happening on every single incoming tick that this study is running on. So rather than doing it twice, you'd only have to do it once. Something to think about. Now, here we are grabbing like an average, basically. Why is there 60 here? Oh, because this is in seconds. This is time since open in seconds. You're dividing by 60 because this is in seconds. One way I like to denote this in code is to create like a constant integer and say number of seconds in 1 minute equals 60. And then what I do is instead of having a magic number, I say num seconds in 1 minute, something like that. Because now when I'm reading the code later in a month, I'll be like, oh, I know exactly what that's doing, instead of just having the magic number of 60 there. So that can be just a way to make your code more readable. This is a ratio you're getting from that input. This is an input setting. And here you're specifying a bar period structure from Sierra chart. You're grabbing the bar period. You are doing some calculations here and setting the bar period. Okay, so what is your question? So yeah, what's the question on this one? Let me turn a fan on in here. It's getting really warm. You want to reduce the processing so that it's not as heavy on each load. So that's a good question. Performance improvements are always something that we should be doing with our code, trying to achieve a better, faster running code. So the one thing that we already did, Ahmed, was you saw me remove the separate loop that you had. And this is actually a topic in computer science. if you do a search for, oh my gosh, what is it called? O notation? I forgot the exact computer science name for it. But basically, there's a type of notation or a way to state the level of effort that the process, in this case your script, needs to take in order to accomplish its task, and it's completely relative to the process itself. So if, for example, you had a chart and it had, actually, let's say it had 100 bars on this chart, 0 bar up to 99 bar, right? So you have 100 bars on this chart, 100 bars on this chart. Now, let's say you had a study in Sierra, and that study has to iterate over every single one of those bars. So that's going to be 1n level of complexity, because you have to go through the entire data set one time. What you had, Ahmed, by having this in a separate for loop, meant that after you did that pass, you had to go through and do this entire pass again. That is likely going to increase this to 2n. So this is basically doubling the amount of time that you have to process through all these bars, potentially, depending on the level of calculations that you're making on each bar. There's other factors that come into play, but basically you want to reduce this number as low as you possibly can so that you have the zippiest, fastest study. So let's look for other performance improvements that we can make. One thing that you could do, Ahmed, is that right now on every single tick, so let me take this out. On every incoming tick, you are going from 0 to 100 each time, if we pretend that we have 100 bars on that chart. That may not be necessary for what you're trying to accomplish. One thing you could do is you could, on chart load, do this calculation once, but then store the results in a meaningful way so that after that recalculation, you're only processing whatever the live bar is. Let's say this is the live current bar. And so by saving all of this, either to a persistent variable or whatever other method, then you only need to process on the very last bar. We talked about this in a coding stream or two past, but the easiest way to accomplish this is to have your code basically blocked off into two segments. One segment is for recalculation purposes, like if you have a fresh load or you hit refresh or you change a symbol, like you switch from AMD to Apple or something. And you can just say if SC index is equal to 0, then you know you're in a recalc situation or a refresh situation. And basically what that means is that you need to start from 0. Start from index 0. Okay, this means start up here. If your sc.index is equal to sc.arraySize minus 1, then what that means is that you're actually on the current live bar. So now you've gated away the two different scenarios. You know that if you're in this situation, you do not need to iterate through every single one of the bars on the chart. You can go ahead and just reference whatever calculated values you remembered from this pass, because inside of here, what you're doing is you're calculate everything and store to persistent memory. And so you're storing all your calculated values to some persistent memory, and then you're able to then, from this case, you're able to reference that persistent memory and then use that for calculations up here. Does that make sense, Ahmed? Let's see, we got, I want to change it to 0, I want to reduce the processing, big O notation. Okay, thanks guys. This is what the study should do. If the, hold on. If the volume of the day is 10 million after 10 minutes from the open, that change the volume bar to 1 million. Yeah, so well, there's a couple different things. If this is an intraday chart and you're only caring about the current day, you don't need to process from 0 to SC. You don't need to process from 0 to SC dot array size. You don't need to do that because if the current day starts here, let's pretend just for example the current day starts at bar. Oops, geez. 63. I don't know. I just made that up. But pretend that the current day starts right here. You don't care about any of this, right? The chart will be 1 day. Oh, so you're going to limit the chart to 1 day. Okay, that's fine. But let's say you, for whatever reason, didn't limit the chart to 1 day. Let's say you had a 30-day chart or a 5-day, I don't know, something that was more than 1 day. This is how you would do that. You would first say on fresh bar load, you would say, hey, what is the first bar of the current day? And then you'd be like, oh, it's bar index 63. And then your loop would start at bar index 63 up to sc.array size rather than from 0. So the way I do that is typically I have two integers and I call it start index and end index, and I calculate what I need to iterate through depending on whatever conditions are required for the study that, or whatever goal I'm trying to accomplish. If you have the charts only set to 1 day, then yeah, your 0 is going to be the beginning of the day. You don't have to worry about that. So in that case, all you have to worry about is this. You don't need to recalc and you don't actually need to go after 10 a.m., right? Or 10 minutes from the open, sorry. So if, let's say the open's 9:30, so 9:40 a.m. would be 10 minutes. 9:30 plus 10, let me check my calculator, is 9:40 a.m. And once you got to 9:40 a.m., you wouldn't really need to continue doing further calculations. At 10 a.m., you don't need to go and recalculate that. And you can just set this once when that happens, and then you don't have to deal with it again. So that's how I'd approach that. Hey,
Is it okay now? The voice?
I can hear you now. Yeah, that sounds better. Yeah, hey.
Yeah, it's continuously changing by the time. I'm saying that if volume of the day equal 10 million, it's an example.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this piece right
Yeah,
here is changing. This piece is changing?
yeah.
Or is it this piece, the 10 minutes, that's changing?
When I change the symbol, volume will change.
Yes, of course. And that's why this piece right here is so important. On the recalc, this includes symbol changes. That's why you have to break
Okay.
it up. That's why this is so important, to break it up so that on a symbol change, or if your chart book closed by accident and you had to reopen it, and Baba's still going. Oh my goodness. Wow. Um, I guess there is a buyer in there. What was I saying? Yeah, if your chart book closes or Sierra chart closes or you change a symbol or your data feed gets disconnected and reconnects, it's going to trigger this recalc and SC index will be reset to 0. So that's why you have to do this and gate it that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, cool. I saw a question from Chris somewhere above. Let me take a screenshot of it. Let's see, there you are. Chris, hey man, how you doing? Let's make this bigger. Okay, Chris is asking about classes in C++. Could you explain classes to a beginner coder in the context of a Sierra chart study for simplicity? Go over the basics of the potential benefits that classes could offer, if any. Okay, so where to start? So C++ is basically a fancy abstraction of C. And in C, we have these things called structs. A struct is basically an object that you can store more data in, and it's contained in this nice little container, which is called a struct. And you can make your own structs. So, for example, if I wanted to create a struct of my favorite, I don't know, my favorite things, I could have in here. Oh my goodness, why is that doing that? I could have in here something like, what's my favorite color? What's my favorite number? What's my favorite, I don't know, car? Something like that. And then you could provide values for those things. And then you can make copies of this struct and use it as a complex data type. So maybe we should bring something more closer to like trading related. So let's say we have a struct. I use structs all the time in building studies. What was the last one I did? Sometimes for when I'm doing time and sales analysis, I will create a struct to represent the data if I don't want the full time and sales record. So I'll call it like Frozen's time and sales or something, and it'll have just a subsection of the data like the date and time, maybe the price, and then maybe the volume that was done at that price at that date and time. So a timestamp, a price, and a volume. The actual time and sales information has a bunch of other metadata. This is again just an example. So structs are really useful for that. We're getting to the classes piece, Chris. The thing that we need to know about structs is that they were carried over into C++, and structs in C++, and I believe in C as well, all of these members, these are called members right here, these are all public in the sense that, maybe I should explain what public means. In terms of code and accessibility from other parts of your code, things can be public and they can be private, and then there's a couple of other states that they can be in, such as like protected, and there's also another modifier that's called static, but we won't get into protected and static here. We're going to just talk about the main two, public and private for now. In a struct, everything is public. Everything is public. And what that means is that from outside of the struct, if I have a piece of code here, this is my study, and I have a struct of frozen time and sales, I can actually say, hey, frozen time and sales structure, give me the price, and I can read that. I can read that from over here in a different piece of code. Likewise, if I wanted to set that to something, I can write to that. Why? Because it's public. Okay? I can write to that. I can read from that. My mouse has lint in it, so it's freaking out over here. 1 second. It's crazy they haven't invented. I'm like scrolling up and it won't go up. They still haven't invented a mouse that's.
Can you read in between studies?
Can you read in between studies? Yes, but that is different than you wouldn't be able to read a struct in between studies unless it was explicitly like exposed or exported in that way. So one study would not be able to read the struct of another piece of study's code unless that was exposed explicitly. So in the context of what we're talking about for the other Chris's question, it would be within the same study, but this data structure, this is a data structure, this right here is a data structure. This data structure is public, so everything within it and all these members of it are public. So everything within it is public. Now, um,
Can it be persistent?
no, persistent is going to, so persistence is going to be a completely separate topic. So between, excuse me, between runs of studies or of a single study, so between this tick and that tick, anything will be lost unless it's persisted. So no, it will not automatically persist between ticks on the same study. That's a completely separate topic of persistent variables that I think I promised somebody I'd make a video on, or I'd try to make
Am
a
I
video on.
am I right in saying at the moment with Sierra there's just persistent variables as an individual, not persistent arrays, other than if you're doing a subgraph?
So take the subgraph piece out of it.
Yep.
Anything that's in a Sierra study is by default a local variable, unless you make it a global variable or you make it a persistent variable explicitly. So everything is in a local scope. So this conversation is actually kind of about scope. One
I
second.
see. Yeah.
Now, to get to the core of what Chris's question was is, okay, so what is what? So I have structs, great, but what about C++ classes? A C++ class is very similar to a struct. In fact, it is underneath the hood. I think it is just an extrapolation of this and adding on. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that is true. I'm gonna have to go check my Bjarne Strustrup C++ book after this to see if I made that up or not, but I believe these are built off of. But what classes are is that they actually allow you to have a mix of scope types of the various members in here, so everything is not public. So let's say I made my frozen TS into a class, so class frozen time and sales. And then in here, what I can do is I can declare things that are going to be public. I can declare things that are going to be private. And then what that allows me to do is to have a private variable, say it's an integer called my favorite number. And if I have my code over here and I have a class, so if I say, my frozen time and sales object, and I say dot my favorite number equals 10 or something, this will bomb out. This will not work. You cannot do this. Why? Because my favorite number is private. You cannot modify a private member of a class externally. And that is the difference between something like a struct, where you can, because this is all public, all these members are public in a class. This is private. So then that begs the question, well, how the heck do you actually modify this? Well, what you do is you create accessor functions, or methods, I believe they would be called in a class. So what you would do is you'd create a function called update favorite number, and it takes an integer. And then what you would do from your code is not this. You would do instead update, or what did I call it? Frozen time and sales dot update favorite number, and then you'd pass in your favorite number. And then in the actual definition of this function, this is going to call this function. And then this function in its declaration, it's going to take that integer, it's going to return nothing, and what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and update this private variable. Why? Because this function will live inside this class, so therefore it does have access to the private members of this class. The outside code does not. This code inside the class does. So it would just say my favorite number equals num, and what that will do is that will allow you to actually update that private member of this class. So that is how you do it. And what that prevents is once your code gets more complex, you want to have things like these private members not be modifiable from just anywhere or anything at any time. You want to have them be gated off so that any touches to these private members are only done through, let's call them sanctioned or specified functions or member, what are they called? Um, Methods. They're called methods. So this is a class method that is modifying this private member. And Chris, that's kind of the main explanation of what a class can do. You can put functions in a class that are private or public. You can, yeah, so not just variables, member variables, you can put functions in here too. Let's say this is an important helper function, but you don't want anyone outside of the class to be able to call it. You only want it to be able to be called within the code of this class. You don't want anyone else outside of this class who's calling the code being able to access or call this helper function. So what is it? It'd be private. If you do want to have something someone could call, let's say, get my favorite number. This type of call could, when you write the definition of it, could just return my favorite number. And so that is how you would access things. Does that make sense, Chris? Or is that the explanation you were looking for? So, which do you use? Well, depends on what you're trying to do. If you want to make a quick and dirty container to just store some data, this is a very good, quick, easy way to do this. Like if you just need a container to store stuff, this is a great way to do it. You don't really, if you're just careful about how you're accessing stuff and you are in full awareness and control of what you're trying to accomplish, just use a struct. If you're trying to make a more planned out, larger, has concerns about accessing various member variables and functions within it type of structure, then it might be time to go and consider making a class instead of using just a struct as a container. So, yeah. I think we had another question here. Been going for an hour and a half. Neo says, thanks for helping. I'll use the template. Okay, awesome. Cool. Thank you. Okay, we've been going for an hour and a half here. Any other questions? Last minute questions before we sign off for the day? Chris says, I've got a question. Let me just copy it.
Yeah, I've got one last quick question.
Question about accessing a SQL server. Would you do this via HTTP request?
From Sierra Chats.
Probably not. I probably would not do it from Sierra. There's a couple of questions that would come into play. So you have Sierra and you have your study, and then you have a SQL server. It's a database. Biomed, thank you. And are they on the same machine? Does this live in the cloud? Does this live on a different computer?
No, they're both on the same machine.
They're both on the same machine. So this is a local SQL database.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then you wouldn't need to probably do it via an HTTP request, because what would be the point of going through that protocol? Because SQL is not going to be running on HTTP protocol. It's going to be, you're going to access it through a different protocol called, well, it's going to be the MySQL protocol, I believe. It's going to be on a different port. Like HTTP requests are going to be typically on port 80 or 443 if it's encrypted, or SSL. That's not going to be what you need here. You're going to want a MySQL port and protocol, which I believe is on port 3306 by default, and you can change that. But there's a couple ways to accomplish this.
I think SQL Server's on 3389.
Oh, is it? Oh, it's not MySQL. It's Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server. My bad.
Yeah.
It's Microsoft SQL Server. So it's on a different port. Whatever. It's still a different protocol than HTTP. So the way to do this, if you wanted to do it from Sierra, which I probably would not recommend directly, I would not directly recommend, but if you wanted to, what you would need to do is install some kind of SQL Server adapter, like a plugin or some kind of
like an ODBC plugin or an OLE.
I'm not sure if you would need to necessarily use RDC, but you would need some kind of library, unless you're going to build it out from scratch, to access SQL Server. So it looks like someone's posting an example of it, but you'd basically have to install that extra code and configure it so that your Sierra study could call that and create the connection to this resource. And it's going to create that connection to this resource. Now, why would you not want to do that directly from? Well, because this is running on a single thread.
Right, I see, yeah.
And so what that means is that you have data coming in. This is data coming in. And there's a lot of it. And now you want to take CPU cycles from Sierra, which is running your studies, it's running your incoming data feeds, it's running all this other stuff. And you want to take that and you're going to basically pause all of that. You're going to stall all of that to make this external call using this external library, which is going to hang your thread until this returns back. It will not go back it will not continue to process incoming data until this returns back. This is going to take time for this transaction to happen. So you're going to hang your process. You're going to hang your process on Sierra by doing this. So I would probably not recommend writing directly from the Sierra study. So what do you do then? How do you actually accomplish this? Well, you decouple it. What you do is you have Sierra write to something. It can be a number of different things, preferably not a flat file, but you can write to something which then will carry its own process and build an adapter to this that'll be outside, and thus you are cutting off, after Sierra's written to that, you've cut off this entire piece of the pie into a set. Let me take this NVIDIA alert off. After you finish writing what your intent is to here, this is its own process, its own thread, and then it's communicating back to here, especially if you're only doing a one-way storage of information. So what that allows you to do is, after you dump this command or this instruction to this outside process that's going to be writing to your database, Sierra can pick up and continue its data. It doesn't have to wait for the SQL server to do the operation, execute the statement, the insert statement or the lookup statement, the select statement, whatever you're trying to do. It doesn't have to wait for the return, so it's much more speedy. So what you want to do is this decoupling of your concerns, so that you are not doing it all from one thread and likely stalling out and hanging your Sierra process. Figure out what you wanna write it to an external process. Maybe either you can build it in C++ with an existing library or whatever. If you want to do Python or some other library to write to SQL Server, that's fine too. Have that process pick it up and take it over to there.
Cool.
Did you say oh or cool?
Cool. I said
Oh,
cool.
cool,
That, yeah,
cool.
that
Okay.
sounds. Yeah.
Cha says you're better off doing it outside of Sierra. Yeah. Yep. Chris says you could write a function that does a SQL call and call it in a separate thread. Yes, that is a more, so since this is C and C++, you can do anything. And what you can do is you could fork something called forking a process. And yes, this is probably another layer of it. Basically, you could create a new process from within your Sierra study and point it to go do this operation. That is possible as well, but you do need to then manage that thread that you created, and um, that goes into a whole separate number of concerns. I actually haven't done any multi-threading C++ programming in a decade, I think, so I'm probably not the best resource for finding out about that. I'm sure there's a plethora of YouTube videos explaining how to do multi-threading C++, but yeah, it's a lot more complicated. I would probably just decouple it and do it this way just to keep it simpler. But if you want to do it all from Sierra, you could do what Chris is saying, or fork a new thread, um, have that thread execute this process, and then manage the thread and the memory concerns that come along with that. So you don't have ghost threads and other stuff running around with no handles on them. Okay. um, yeah, going for an hour 40 here. I think we'll cut it here. And thank you guys for joining. Some excellent questions. I'm gonna head off to work and get some stuff done on this Friday. No trade. I know that Baba. I know. I was watching that thing. It just kept going. Where is it? Where is it? Yeah, it just kept going. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Hardly any retracement. What a choppy day. 59%. Oh, nice. Oh, that was a Baba. Yeah, Nvidia to reclaimed highs too. Oh, wow. That went to new highs too. Anyways, have a good weekend, guys. Take care. Thanks for joining.